serious, Redditors who have gotten kidnapped before, what happened and how did you escape? I was 24 and coming home around 3 AM one night from being the designated driver. I parked outside my apartment and a man with a gun approaches as I am getting out of the car. He forces me back in and yells at me to climb over into the passenger seat. I am a blubbering mess at this point and just know I am going to die. He drives me to an ATM and wants me to get him some cash. I had $4 in my bank account, so he was pretty pissed. He starts driving around and I start trying to figure out how to get myself out of the situation. I turn in my seat toward him and start trying to talk to him, even touching him on the arm so he might start seeing me as another human. While I am doing this, I reach up behind and unlock the door. Eventually he comes to a stop at a red light. I notice a car has pulled up behind us and I throw open the door and jump out. He grabs me and my clothes rip, but I get out. He takes off and the people in the car behind me call the cops. A couple months later I have to go to the police station and pick him out of a lineup. I meet 2 other women he did this to and realize I was extremely lucky compared to what they went through. Another year later and I go to trial since my incident had the most evidence. He gets 99 years in prison and won't be eligible for parole until he is 64. Took me a number of years to feel comfortable being out alone at night. I joined an outreach program that went into prisons and that was probably the best therapy I could have ever gotten. I am happy to say that event does not plague me any longer and I have forgiven the man who did it. When I was 4 I was kidnapped by my mom. He just ran off one day without informing my dad of anything, and she stole a lot of stuff from his house. I was missing for 60 days until he found me. They ended up going to court and he won primary and full custody over me. I was 9 when this happened. My brother was getting drunk. Some friends and some sketchy characters started to show up at the party. I was in my room when a dude smashed the door and dragged me to his car. My brother, drunk and high, tried to stop him. My brother got shot by a .38 and I was kidnapped. The guy drugged me, I found out years after, and took me to a warehouse where his buddies were. They kept me there for a few days when SWAT burst through the skylight and windows. Turns out there were 20-ish kids there and that they were being sold as "Be creative." The SWAT got a tip from my brother's friend who trailed the dude who took me. Not me, my childhood neighbor. So probably doesn't count but it might help somebody. The neighbor was a little girl playing in her front yard and when the man grabbed her and covered her mouth she bit through his arm. Like, took a mouthful of him. He dropped her. She ran off screaming. Literal, bloody murder. Genius went to the ER for stitches and was caught. Our moms all told us to do exactly that if that situation ever came up. I wasn't kidnapped, but my son was. Last year, 1 year, 1 month, and 3 weeks ago, he was found the same day. My ex, not my son's father, was abusive and crazy. Basically my ex and I were in an argument while in the car and I got out of the car, went to grab my son out of the back. He was only an infant, and my ex jumped in the driver's side and took off. Long story short, police found my car with my son still in it, alone. They had sent officers to every highway in town to make sure my car wasn't leaving the area. Eventually they found it. My son was okay, just crying and soaking wet because of his diaper. My ex was all over the newspapers because of this. I'm terrified my son will see it someday tbh. I have a very long version of this story in my post history. I posted it on our Let's Not Meet a few months ago. Well, I wasn't kidnapped, but I was babysitting my sister's kids at their house when their father came to pick them up for his weekend custody visit. I put them in the car with him, made sure they had a change of clothes, a toy apiece, and kissed them goodbye. I honestly barely spoke to their father because we already hated each other then. I just said something like, "Be careful with them," and then he left. I locked up and left too. The next day, my sister called me and told me he had just called her from across the Mexican border. He'd taken the kids, without any documentation whatsoever, across, and was on his way to central Mexico, where his parents live. That prompted a really miserable 2 years of researching and trying a lot of things, both legal and some not so much, to get them back. Short story, it's very difficult to extract internationally kidnapped kids from Mexico, especially when one's own country's systems are so broken and flawed. Anyway, After 2 years, my sister managed to get them back quasi-legally. More on that if someone's interested, and I was very happy to get to go with her on that trip. I don't get to see them much now since they moved out of state, but the crippling depression and despair that I was the one who inadvertently allowed them to be kidnapped has eased a bit. They're doing pretty well. The kids are in school and they seem to have reacclimated to US culture well enough. They were treated very poorly in Mexico, beaten, starved, and not allowed to go to the doctor, so they both have a few ongoing health issues, but they are and have been treated for a lot of that. Removed due to embarrassment. When I was 12 years old, I sat next to a woman on a plane to Las Vegas. When my mother fell asleep on the plane, a lady in her mid-30s started talking to me. She was saying things like, "Your parents are con artists and I have a mansion you can come live in and I will give you lots of money if you leave your parents and come live with me," and things along those lines. After the plane landed and everyone was walking to get off the plane, the lady grabbed my wrist and pulled me and began ushering me in front of her. My mom lost her mind and caused a huge scene. I am not sure how the conversation went among everyone. I was very distraught, but they made me wait on the plane while police escorted the lady off the plane to question her elsewhere. To this day, I cannot believe she attempted to do this while my parents were right there and on a plane no less. I will never know the lady's true intentions, but the older I got the more sinister the situations became in my head. Last summer, I went to Walmart around 1 AM on a Sunday night. I work night shift so I was fairly comfortable but still aware of my surroundings. I bought an HDMI cable and a bag of chips and was walking out to my car when a car pulled up to mine. When the guy got out, I just assumed he was going into the store. I unlocked my car and he came around the side. At that point I was a little anxious but just thought he was gonna ask for money or a cigarette. Then I saw his gun. He told me not to say anything and to get in the back seat of his car. He said if I did what he said, he wouldn't hurt me. I got in his car, and he gave the gun to a kid, probably 13 or so, in the passenger seat. The kid held the gun on me while the man took my wallet, phone, and keys. They drove to an ATM and withdrew all the money from my bank account, only about $200 because I'm a broke college kid. They kept talking about whether or not they should kill me or let me go. I convinced them to drop me off as long as I promised not to say anything to the cops. They kept my phone but gave me my wallet and keys back and dropped me off in the ghetto. I walked to a gas station and the cashier called the cops for me. I think they had a hard time believing me because I seemed so calm, but it was the worst night of my life. Not really sure if this counts as a kidnapping, since I was only with them for about 20 minutes, but it sucked. I was taken from my mother by my father when I was 2. I remember a lot about it. He took me back to his city several hours away. My mom, who was only 20, figured out where I was, dressed up in a disguise and stole me back. Wasn't technically a kidnap, but when I went to Niger when I was around 8 or 9, some man wearing a turban grabbed me and carried me across this bridge and was talking to me in Arab. I couldn't understand anything and I was just confused and scared. He dropped me and I got up. As soon as I got up he tried to push me into the river underneath the bridge because we were still on the bridge whilst he dropped me. After that he just walked away like nothing happened. This happened 6-7 years ago and still freaks me out. I got pushed into a car in London and held for 14 hours in a car that had been stripped of much of its internal paneling with a door that could only be opened from outside. I don't really know what his intentions were, but he was going through a pretty serious crisis. He told me how his wife had left him after revealing how neither of his 2 children were his. He was unemployed and evidently addicted to crack sugar. For 14 hours, he shared many of his fears and problems along with a desire to end it. As the time passed, I became a little impatient as I had a plane to catch, but soon abandoned such hope after he started shouting and stabbing the dashboard with a 10 screwdriver because I wasn't listening. Through all of this, I recognized a man at the end of his rope that needed someone to talk to. Although terrified at some points, I calmed myself by believing that I could get through it if I could keep him calm and see me as a friend, albeit one that needed to go home. Eventually, the sun rose, the drugs ran out and wore off, and he had shared all he could. I encouraged him to speak with his family and try to seek legal advice. I gave him my email address and he opened the door and I found my way to the tube station. I don't know how things turned out for him. He never contacted me. I was kidnapped by my mentally ill father when I was 3. My mother had left him. Me and my sister, who was 6 years older, were staying at our maternal grandparents. My father came and picked us up for a weekend visit. When he was roughly 1 mile from the house, he stopped and told my sister to get out of the car. She walked back to our grandparents and he took off with me. He took me to Arizona from Texas, called my mother and told her he'd leave me to die in the desert if she didn't tear up the divorce papers. She convinced him that she'd come back. He returned me and we promptly went on the run. We moved over 19 times in 10 years in an effort to hide from him. My last name was changed numerous times so he couldn't easily find me again. The truly awful part, my father wasn't the worst part of my childhood. The man my mother married when I was 6 was a pedophile. Wow, okay, here's what happened to me. I was fixing a friend's computer late night after work and I finished, so I went to the gas station on my way home. After filling up, this guy jumps in my car. He tells me to drive. So I do. I drove towards a police station thinking I will be safer if I could get close to it. So while I'm driving, I notice that he only had a percussion screwdriver, like the one you might fix your glasses with. So I pull over, get out of the car, and I pull his ass out of my car. He gets up and throws a punch. I grab his wrist, kick the ball of his knee, and put my knee in his sternum. I got him once more and yell, "If you get up before the cops get here, I'll duck and kill you." I pulled my phone or called the cops. He lay there cradling his arm until the cops get there. The cops couldn't believe the story, and as it turned out, he was transported to the hospital because I broke his arm and xiphoid process. He then went to jail for kidnapping and attempted robbery. Not quite kidnapped, but just about. In my hometown when I was in elementary school, 2nd grade, there was a white van that had been abducting children. They sent a note to all the parents and then had an assembly with us warning us about it. Sure enough, my brother and I were walking home and a white van stopped. First they asked us if we wanted candy. My older brother, 6th grade, just stood there still. Then they told us our parents were in an accident and they were supposed to pick us up. I shouted, "Run!" and my brother and I hightailed it to the front door of a nearby house and knocked frantically. A woman in her 30s answered and we told her to call 911 because the white van was trying to abduct us. She told us that it wasn't nice to play pranks like that when people's lives were in danger. What? Not the response I suspected. We looked back toward the main street and they were gone. So my brother and I shrugged and walked home through the homes instead of on the main street. When our parents got home, they didn't believe us either, which was weird, because my mom worked in a school in a bad area and normally was good about stuff like this. The next day, I get called into the office out of class and my brother is sitting there. Apparently the lady called them and based on our descriptions, they picked us out of school. They read us the riot act about making false reports. I cried and shouted at them why they bother to have an assembly if they aren't going to believe a real report after that. Anyway, the cops did catch the people, a policeman and woman, 2 weeks later, but only after one more abduction and murder. Technically both my brothers and I were kidnapped by our dad when I was 9. My parents were going through a nasty divorce and my dad had us for a trip in Vermont. He asks us if we wanted to see Canada and all of us being under 9 and thinking it's cool are totally down for it. Here's where it gets ducked up a little bit. None of us had passports except for our dad. We pull up to the Canadian border and the border agent asks my dad all these questions. Like, where is the children's mother? What are your plans? etc. Somehow he's allowed through and we spend the day in Canada. Come back to the American border and the border agent jokes with us and lets us through even though there's 3 children with no American passports. My mom finds out from us later and loses her it. Apparently it's a kidnapping if you take children to another country during an intense divorce without the other parent present. My brother also almost got kidnapped when walking home from school. A group of friends find an injured squirrel. A random guy in a van pulls up and offers to take it to the vet and asked if anyone wanted to go with him. My brother said no because it would have taken too long and just walked off. His stupid luck saved him from being kidnapped. Probably going to be buried, but whatever. I was 2 years old and I was in Vietnam with my mom. Her native country, my half Asian plus half Caucasian looks drew a lot of attention anytime we went into the marketplace, and several people would come to look at me, touch my hair, take pictures of me. Anyway, one second I was with my mom, and the next second she turned around and I was gone. She panicked, obviously, and after asking several bystanders, she found me an hour later with an old man. He had carried me safely to his home so he could show me to his wife. My mom thinks it's kind of cute now, and I don't remember any of that, so I'm probably the luckiest victim of kidnapping there ever was. I wasn't really kidnapped, but I almost was. Thankfully I trusted my gut. Back in the days of MySpace, I was like 12 and middle school did not treat me well, so I hardly had any friends to talk to. So, I started talking to someone I met, I think off MySpace. Could have been somewhere else, but it was from the internet. Well, we had a plan to meet at the Dollar Movie Theater. You could go see a movie for $1. Great as a middle schooler. My brother was also going, but a different movie. Well, turns out the person I was meeting wasn't my age at all. Like probably 25. Very overweight woman who a grown man boyfriend with her. So, I decided to opt out and go to the movie my brother was going to. She texted me a lot afterward being mad I didn't want to hang out with her, but I just told her to leave me alone, and eventually she did. Never told my parents in fear of getting in trouble. 2 attempts, no kidnappings. One when I was 5 riding my bike to a friend's house a block or 2 down. A woman in a car tried to lure me with the "I lost my puppy, can you help?" thing. Completely oblivious and close to my friend's house, I straight up told the lady that I hated dogs, hadn't seen any wandering around, and would not like to join her because I had other plans. Luckily my friend's mom came outside then to watch for my arrival and called me over. The lady sped off. The second time happened in the 5th grade when my mom was running late, so I walked down a couple blocks to a church to meet her and waste time. On my way a weird old guy started following me, but right when he was going to make his move a mailman pulled around the corner, saw what was happening and yelled at the guy. The guy sped off and I thanked the mailman. He said he would wait until my mom showed up. Moral of the story, I was a dumb child. Dogs are gross, and male people are society's most unappreciated superheroes. Just putting this out there in case anyone ends up in an abduction situation, your best bet is to fight like hell to avoid being taken to a second location. Your odds of escape are highest within the first minute of the encounter. Not nearly as interesting as others' tales, and I wasn't abducted, but it was an attempt. One day after school, about 5th grade, me and my friends were walking home and some random guy in a van sticks his head out the window and called for us to get in his van. Super weird because he said it so bluntly without trying to lure us or anything. But we saw him open the door and we just bolted to our nearest friend's house who was 2 blocks away. Apparently I was the only one that got a good look at the guy, so I missed a day of school to go to the police station to do one of those digital face sketches, and we hung up posters around the neighborhood warning PPL to look out for that sick duck. I was held up at gunpoint and put in the trunk of my own car, while my friend was made to drive to the other side of town. The kidnapper dropped us off in a risky neighborhood then drove off, while threatening to shoot us. The closest thing to a movie plotline was when he yelled back that he was going to check my phone, and if I had called the cops he was going to shoot us both. I hadn't called anyone because he would have heard me talking, but I texted my mom, so I was worried he'd see that. I took the battery out of my phone. This was in the early days of smartphones, but I still had a flip phone, and put it in a board game case next to my head. He stopped and checked my phone and seemed satisfied when it was dead. They busted him 2 weeks later on a warrant for drug charges, and I got my car back, covered in grimy fingerprint dust and fast food droppings, with enough miles to have driven to Florida just like he said he would. On a business trip, I called an Uber. Car pulls up, says it's my Uber. A lot of my Uber cars that same week did not have the sticker on it, so I thought nothing of it. I'm also really used to using Lyft, but this city didn't have hardly any Lyft usage. So, when I saw multiple PPL in the car, IHSD been drinking, I assumed it was a split fare like you can do with Lyft. Well, it wasn't. Realized when they pulled a knife. They demanded for me to do weird tasks, like buy them alcohol and cigs, and drove me around for hours. Stole my debit cards and SS card. finally dropped me off after they had my cards. I walked back to my hotel, stunned. Didn't quite know what to do or say. I just thought I'd been robbed. I wasn't even using the words kidnapping. But when I went to the police station, that is when they labeled it as a second-degree kidnapping charge. I'm a survivor of abuse from 2008, and I've been to therapy for that. But this has brought my PTSD back like a mother ducker. I had to go back to therapy and get a psychiatrist because I couldn't sleep at night for months. They also caught one of the kidnappers from video, so I'll have to go back to testify because they're pleading not guilty. I would provide more info, but it's an active case still, I guess. It was pretty ducking scary, but I think being compliant got me safe.